All right, picture this. It's the sweltering summer of 1945. We are stepping into a living, breathing, and terrifyingly uncertain world right now. You know, the war in Europe has finally ended, but over in the Pacific, the world is essentially poised on a knife edge. We so often look back at the end of World War II as this neat, inevitable sequence of events, right? Like, it was always going to end the way it did. But the reality on the ground, it was anything but. It was an incredibly fragile balance of agonizing human choices, unprecedented technology, and honestly, sheer unpredictable chance. Outcomes were completely unknown, the risks were literally existential, and every single decision carried the weight of millions of lives. So, let's dive into this explainer and look closely at the ticking clock of August 1945.
Now, to really wrap our heads around the deployment of the atomic bombs, we actually have to step into the minds of the Allied planners for a moment. They were facing an adversary that flat out refused to yield, even as its cities were being reduced to ash by conventional firebombing. Secretary of War Henry Stimson later reflected on the agonizing decision with this exact quote: "This deliberate, premeditated destruction was our least abhorrent choice." He basically had to compile this terrifying ledger of debits and credits, but paid in human lives. The Allies were prepping for a full-scale invasion that they genuinely believed would cost over 1 million American casualties, and vastly more for the Japanese. So the decisions made in these war rooms, they were born from a desperate and frankly terrifying geopolitical calculus.
Section 1. The grim calculus of war. Let's set aside what we know happens next for a second, and look at the horrifying military realities staring both sides in the face that summer. Look at the sheer scale of the projected bloodshed here. Over on the left, you've got Operation Downfall. That was the Allied plan to invade the Japanese home island starting in October 1945. And American manpower was running seriously low at this point. The public was deeply, deeply war-weary. But then, on the right, we have Operation Ketsugo. This was Japan's strategy for the decisive battle. They had actually correctly guessed the exact invasion sites and were prepping for an all-out defense of national self-annihilation. We aren't just talking about 2.3 million regular troops here. They mobilized a 28 million civilian militia. Women, children, the elderly, they were given minimal training and armed with bamboo spears, awls, and small knives. Now, traditional military doctrine dictates an attacker needs a 3-to-1 advantage to win, right? By late summer, the ratio of Japanese defenders to Allied invaders was nearing a terrifying 1-to-1. It was a nightmare scenario.
And the chillingly analytical way the atomic bomb was deployed is just laid totally bare in this target selection matrix. Notice Kyoto right up at the top. So a target committee prioritized large, urban areas completely untouched by firebombing. Why? So they could accurately measure the new weapon's blast effects. Kyoto was actually the initial primary target, but Secretary Stimson personally vetoed it because of its profound cultural significance. Hiroshima was chosen next for its flat river delta, which was absolutely ideal for maximizing blast damage. But now, look closely at Nagasaki down at the bottom. It was actually a really hasty substitution added just weeks before the drop. Topographically speaking, its steep valley was totally unsuited for an atomic blast, and it was never even on the reserved list that shielded the other cities from conventional bombing. But its deep water port and those massive Mitsubishi arms factories, that sealed its fate.
It's crazy to think about, but literally a single word can alter the course of human history. On July 26th, the Allies issued the Potsdam Declaration. This was a massive ultimatum demanding unconditional surrender or face prompt and utter destruction. In Tokyo, the government was deeply divided and basically stalling, waiting to see if the Soviet Union would act as a neutral mediator. In a press conference, Prime Minister Suzuki used the word mokosatsu. Now, he likely meant they were withholding comment, essentially just ignoring it for now. But here's the catch. The word can also mean to kill with silence or reject. The international press and the Allies interpreted it as a flat-out rejection of the ultimatum. And with that, the die was cast.
Section 2. The Doomed Flight of Bockscar.
You know, the first atomic mission over Hiroshima on August 6th was executed with almost perfect technical precision. But this second mission, it was a terrifying descent into absolute chaos. This is the minute-by-minute survival story of Major Charles Sweeney's crew on August 9th. Before they even managed to take off from Tinian, a broken fuel pump trapped 640 gallons of precious reserve fuel. They launched anyway with a live plutonium weapon, Fat Man, sitting in the bomb bay. Then, a howling typhoon forces them to rendezvous at a much higher, fuel-draining altitude, fighting these deafening winds. After that, they waste 40 critical minutes just flying in circles, waiting for an observation plane that literally never shows up. When they finally make it to their primary target, Kokura, it's totally obscured by smoke from a conventional firebombing raid happening nearby. After 3 failed bomb runs, their fuel is getting dangerously low. So they divert to their secondary, geographically unsuitable target, Nagasaki. The bomb drops, but it actually misses its aim point by nearly a mile. detonating over the Urakami Valley instead.
And the tension didn't magically end with a drop. Bockscar was practically gliding at this point. They didn't even have enough fuel to reach their designated safety base at Iwo Jima. Sweeney has to divert to Okinawa, firing literally every emergency flare they had on board to clear the busy runway. They slammed down at 140 miles per hour, which is 20 miles over the normal landing speed, with 2 of their engines literally dying from fuel starvation mid-landing. They are violently swerving just to avoid crashing into a row of parked B-24 bombers. When the flight engineer finally checked the tanks, they had exactly 7 gallons of fuel left. 7 gallons. This wasn't some pristine textbook military operation. It was a desperate, cascading series of near-fatal errors while carrying a weapon of mass destruction.
Section 3. The Empire's Final Deadlock.
We really need to zoom out from the bomber cockpit now and step into the suffocating, sweltering air raid bunker beneath the Imperial Palace over in Tokyo. Incredibly, even after the total annihilation of Hiroshima, the Japanese Supreme Council for the Direction of the War, they were known as the Big Six, was completely paralyzed. They operated by strict consensus, and they were dead split 3-3. The peace faction, completely recognizing total military ruin, wanted to surrender with just one single condition: preserving the emperor. But the war faction, they were so entrenched, they demanded 3 additional, totally impossible conditions. They wanted to disarm themselves, they flatly refused any Allied occupation of Japan, and they demanded to conduct their own war crimes trials. They seriously still believed they could bleed the Americans on the beaches and force a negotiated peace.
Just look at how rapidly the entire geopolitical world fractured in literally a single week. August 6th, Hiroshima is bombed. The military hardliners basically shrug it off, genuinely doubting America has the materials for a second bomb. August 8th, the Soviet Union abruptly declares war and invades Manchuria, totally shattering Japan's last hope for a mediated peace. August 9th, the news of Nagasaki reaches that bunker, proving undeniably that America has a working atomic arsenal. Yet, incredibly, the Big Six remained deadlocked 3-3. It took a completely unprecedented action, the direct personal intervention of Emperor Hirohito himself in the very early hours of August 10th, to break the tie and finally accept the terms. And even then, the night before the surrender broadcast, radical military officers launched a violent coup. They overran the palace, trying to destroy the recording of the emperor's speech and assassinate the peace faction. The coup ultimately failed, and on August 15th, the Japanese people heard their emperor's voice for the very first time in history.
Section 4. The Agony of the Hibakusha.
As the political chessboard finally settled, a profound and enduring human tragedy was just getting started on the ground. The tragic irony of the Nagasaki bombing is it's devastating. Remember how Bockscar missed its primary aim point? Because of that, the Fat Man bomb detonated directly over the Urakami Valley. Now, this specific neighborhood happened to be home to the largest Roman Catholic and hidden Christian community in all of Japan. These were people who had secretly maintained their faith through 2.5 centuries of brutal persecution. And in a literal instant, their massive, hand-built Romanesque cathedral was reduced to rubble, burying the priests and parishioners inside. Out of the 15,000 Christians living in the valley, an estimated 10,000 perished. Less than 1% of Japan's total population was Christian, yet they made up over 10% of the atomic bomb victims.
For the survivors, who are known as the Hibakusha, the official end of the war was really just a beginning of their suffering. The intense heat rays caused horrific thermal burns that eventually healed into these thick, deeply debilitating keloid scars. But well beyond the physical disfigurement, they faced severe social ostracization. Fellow citizens, terrified of this unknown radiation contagion, just shunned them. They were outright denied jobs and frequently rejected for marriage. Medically, thousands suffered from what they called Genbaku Burabura, or atomic bomb numbness syndrome. This was a devastating combination of immune system damage, chronic exhaustion, and profound PTSD. Doctors even noted these seasonal mood shifts where survivors would suffer horrific, vivid nightmares as the anniversary of the bombing approached each year. Many lived their entire lives in total silence, terrified of this invisible atomic bomb they felt was still living inside their bodies, just waiting to strike them down or harm their future children.
Section 5. The Legacy of the Ashes.
1951. Following the formal surrender on the deck of the USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, Japan entered a period of profound transformation under Allied occupation. The nation was entirely dehoused, people were starving, and it was completely stripped of its former empire. The occupiers worked to rebuild Japan physically, but also ideologically, totally restructuring its government into a parliamentary democracy and officially stripping the emperor of his divine status. It actually wasn't until the Treaty of San Francisco in 1951 that Japan finally regained its sovereignty as an independent nation and began this incredibly long, arduous climb to democratic and economic recovery.
So, as we've seen, the end of World War II was absolutely not some smooth, inevitable march to peace. It was a terrifying collision of deadlocked fanaticism, high-stakes political brinkmanship, agonizing moral choices, and honestly, sheer blind luck, like a broken fuel pump or a cloudy sky over Kokura. The atomic bombs were deployed in a world desperately searching for any way out of an unimaginable global slaughter. But they left behind this legacy of ashes, deep trauma, and a geopolitical paradigm that, frankly, we are all still trapped in today. As we navigate our own very tense nuclear age right now, we really have to ask ourselves how much of our own survival still depends on a fragile balance of calculated choices and random chance. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the history you think you know.